Alrighty, I know that we're filling in the Zoom room. I know that the webinar style of hosting a Zoom meeting is just no fun on the participant side of things. You don't get to see all these lovely names on your screen, but it is just warming my heart to see so many tried and true NC winners joining us on a Friday afternoon. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll give us just another minute to let the room fill up a little more, and then we will go ahead and get started. And in the meantime, you'll see in the chat that there are some important updates in terms of how to be able to follow along for today's session. So feel free to access both of the links that you have available there. Alrighty, so hi everyone, and thank you all so much for joining us here today. My name is Sarah Sundar, and I'm a higher ed research associate here at NCWIT. And together with our whole team, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our latest installment of the Meeting of the Minds series. Like I said, I know this session falls outside of our typical cadence within the academic year, so I want to offer an extra thank you to all of you for joining us during the summertime. You could be at the beach, at the pool, buried in a book somewhere, and you're choosing to join us here. So thank you for making that choice, and I know it'll be worth your while. And as we're getting started here, I hope you'll take the time to introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to add your name and your institution just so we can get to know each other. As you all know, the Meeting of the Mind series is just one of the many ways that NCWIT supports widening inclusion in the tech field. We also offer a variety of programs and resources to help higher ed computing departments enact systemic change. So if today's session inspires you to do an even deeper dive into BPC work, we would love for you to join us this fall in our Learning Circles program. So just look in the chat for some info that I'll be adding about that in just a bit. And for today, I am so delighted to welcome our Access Computing panelists. Since 2006, the NSF Broadening Participation in Computing Alliance, Access Computing, has worked to increase the participation of people with disabilities in computing education and careers through direct interventions to support computing students with disabilities and increasing the capacity of computing organizations to include people with disabilities. I am thrilled to be joined here today by Dr. Brianna Blazer, Director and Co-PI of Access Computing at the University of Washington, along with Dr. Stacy Branham from UC Irvine, Dr. Raja Kushalnagar from Gallaudet University, and Dr. Elaine Short from Tufts University. And with that, I will turn it over to Brianna. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you for having us here today. We are always excited to have opportunities to connect with more folks and get folks thinking about disability inclusion in computing. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are as Access Computing, how we think about disability inclusion, and then I'm going to pass it off to Stacy to talk about strategic institutional change, which is something that's really been on her mind in the forefront of the work that she is doing. Elaine will then talk about conference accessibility, which we think about a lot from the perspective of how are we welcoming folks into our community. And Raja is going to wrap us up talking about mentoring and advising students with disabilities. He's done a lot of work and won awards in that area. So that is our plan. Let me go to the next slide. Excellent. So I'll tell you a little bit about Access Computing and kind of where we come from. And the first thing to be said is that people with disabilities are underrepresented in computing. Now, it's a little bit hard to get data about people with disabilities, and how it's defined on survey questions varies, but this is some data. So if we look at education, if we look at the TALBY survey, the question on there asks how many students in your computing department are getting accommodations. So if we look at the bachelor's level, we're looking about 3.4% of students are getting accommodations related to disability, and then just over 1% of master's and PhD students. So that's pretty low numbers. If we look across all fields, and again, I believe this is also measuring the percentage of students who are receiving accommodations in school, it's about 8%. Now, we know that that is lower than the proportion of people with disabilities in the population, partially because oftentimes you need documentation and a diagnosis to get those accommodations, which can be expensive and hard to get for various folks. But also that not everybody that has a disability necessarily needs accommodations in an education setting. And if we look at careers, we see a similar difference. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 2.4% of the computing workforce has a disability, and across all fields, it's about double that. So there's something going on here. Let me go to the next slide. So kind of the first question to ask is, why are people with disabilities underrepresented? Part of it, if we think about individuals, people with disabilities have been marginalized and underemployed. There's a long history there. Another big thing is barriers due to inaccessible technology. So until really just the last few years, many of the K-12 computer science tools, almost all of them have been inaccessible. So this means that students are just opting out because they don't expect it to be accessible, or they're not welcomed into the class. They're kind of got this separate but equal treatment when they go to a K-12 computer science class if they need something that's accessible. Hopefully we will see some change there. And then, you know, some of the same things that we talk about when we talk about any underrepresented population, about inhospitable climates and bias from educators, employers, and peers as they're going through the trajectory, right? That shouldn't be surprising. And then if we think more at the institutional and organizational level, what are some of the things that are going on that impact our understanding of why there's underrepresentation? Overall, it's really hard to answer some of these questions because we're not often systematically collecting data about people with disabilities in computing education and careers. It's being measured in different ways with different questions in different spaces. So oftentimes we don't really even have a sense of whether people with disabilities are represented. A lot of times when we are thinking about broadening participation, we aren't thinking about accessibility and disability inclusion. And so this is one of the things we love to do at Access Computing, is show up and just help our friends that are doing other broadening participation work think about how they can be more accessible. And then another piece of this is that we aren't teaching about accessibility in the computing curricula, right? So future engineers and computer scientists are not designing accessible technology because they've never been taught about it, right? And we hear from industry that this is a problem too. Go to the next slide. So Access Computing, as Soraya said, has been around since 2006. I've been with Access Computing since 2011. And our goal has pretty much stayed the same, right? It's to increase the participation of people with disabilities in computing by serving as a catalyst and a national resource to help make computing, education, and career opportunities more welcoming and accessible to people with disabilities. Go to the next slide. And you know, as we think about our vision, this slide came from some discussion that we had when we were doing our reverse site visit. You know, that was like, well, what is really some of our guiding principles? And this was some of what came out from that conversation. You know, disabilities everywhere. It cuts across all demographics. Sometimes somebody who has a disability may not know other people with their same disability, or at least not other people with that disability that have been successful in computing. So really, it's an intersectional population, and anywhere you're going to go, you're going to find folks with disabilities. That we know that both inaccessible technology and inaccessible events and education erect barriers for people with disabilities. I think the other thing we're really focused on is that accessibility is more than just compliance, right? So sometimes when I talk about disability inclusion with somebody, a faculty member, they might say, well, we've got our Office of Disability Services and they take care of all of that. But the reality is those folks are often there to make sure that the university is being compliant with federal and state regulations. They aren't necessarily there to think about how can we proactively rather than reactively make this environment more accessible, right? And so if we're really taking an accessibility mindset, you know, how can we do things proactively? How can we think beyond merely compliance? We also really think people with disabilities benefit from being in community with one another. We learn from one another and develop strategies. And then, of course, it's important to promote future leaders. There isn't a long history of visible leadership in computing of people with disabilities, but we are slowly trying to change that, and it is changing all the time. And more than anything, I think one thing that's really important in the work that we do is this ethos that comes from the disability community, right? Nothing about us without us. In other words, decisions aren't being made for people with disabilities. We aren't deciding what's best for people with disabilities without being in conversation with people with disabilities. And at this point, most of our leadership team and staff identifies as having some sort of disability. And I think that's really important in terms of what we bring to the table. And so that has been really exciting. You can go to the next slide. So we think a lot about individual engagement. How are we working with students with disabilities and students interested in accessibility as they move through those critical junctures on their pathways to computing education and careers? But beyond just thinking about those individuals, we're thinking about organizational capacity building, right? So how are we increasing the capacity of institutions, broadening participation projects, professional organizations, and industry to really be inclusive of people with disabilities in computing fields and promoting accessible and inclusive practices? Sometimes this might mean thinking about curriculum and resource development and dissemination, right? So sometimes faculty are telling us, I'm not teaching about accessibility because I don't know enough. And so integrating accessibility content into computing courses has been something we have worked on. And then again, this idea of impact and sustainability. How do we foster relationships with other stakeholders to promote change? How do we develop a next generation of leaders that are really interested in computing and accessibility, and develop online resources? And go to the next slide. And really, again, thinking this through, there are kind of two approaches to access, right? There's this accommodation focused approach, which is this really reactive approach. Somebody has shown up and something is inaccessible and we are going to fix it. So this might look like a sign language interpreter because I know there's a deaf student in the class. It might look like extra time on tests or flexible deadlines, something like that, right? But this is, oh, we've got to change what's going on because somebody has shown up. We really try and promote instead what's called a universal design approach. You can go to the next slide. Which is really thinking about the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design, right? So this is this really proactive approach of how can we make sure folks get in the room and they have what they need. And there's a picture of a name tag there that you can be used in multiple ways. It's got a lanyard, it's got a clip, it's got a pin. It's double-sided, which you can't tell from the picture. It's got a large font so somebody can read the person's first name from far away. It's got pronouns on there so that it's telling you more about that particular person. And so really being thoughtful about how we even bring name tags to an event can increase accessibility. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to wrap up, but I just want to point out some of the ways you can get involved with access computing before we learn about some of the work my colleagues are doing. For students with disabilities and students interested in accessibility who are studying computing, we have an online mentoring community that's served over 1,400 students since 2006. So we do online mentoring, webinars, meetups with them. We often have funding for REUs over the summer and send students to conferences. And then we also work, we can go to the next slide, with faculty, educators, and professionals. If you're interested in getting involved, again, you can refer students to that team. You can join our community of practice where we share resources on a regular basis. We have time built into our project. If you call us up and say, I have an accessibility issue, I need help on thinking through this thing, we have time to consult with you, connect you with resources and other folks that might be able to help you. If you want to get more involved and think about making change at your organization, you can partner with us or apply for a mini grant for funding to support an activity you want to do in your local environment. So there's more information about all of that on our website at uw.edu/accesscomputing, or you can shoot me an email at blazer@uw.edu. So I think that is my last slide, and I will turn it over to Stacy.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. My name is Stacy Branham, and I'm an associate professor of informatics at the University of California, Irvine. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about strategic institutional change regarding disability inclusion and accessibility. So when I think about institutional change, I think about changing the kind of material and social structures that affect digital access. And the shorthand for this is, if I left the institution, would those changes still stay in effect? And would we still have a more kind of equitable, accessible system? So I have a hunch that many of you are already engaged in this sort of work for various types of inclusion, whether or not they are accessibility focused or maybe focused on, gender equity and things like this. So I'm wondering if you can share just a couple with me. I've got a poll everywhere up here. I believe Eric is putting a link in the chat, and I'd love for the participants to share with us a couple of the things that they've been involved in that they would consider systemic change, right? Or if there's nothing, then go ahead and share that. I'll give you a minute. Let's see if we have anybody there who's had their coffee. Ooh, you've served on a diversity committee or maybe created or convened a diversity committee. Wonderful. So bringing together expertise in a community of folks who are going to think through how can we make things better. Any others? Ooh, a task force for reconsidering admissions criteria. Fantastic. I love forces because they're short-term usually, and they have a very clear goal, and they're focused on making change. Love it. Advocating for CS departments to be more responsive. Very nice. So you're working outside of your institution, thinking about the bigger institution of higher education. Incredible. Created groups of students to promote inclusivity. Fantastic. That's wonderful. I'm going to share with you a couple of the things that we've been involved in here at UC Irvine. And I apologize, the numbers are incorrect. I just have about 5 examples for you. The first one is that I had the opportunity to serve on the strategic planning committee, steering committee for my university. And now we have a clause in our strategic plan about increasing accessibility for students, employees, and visitors with disabilities. A second example is that I worked with the department chairs in my school and brought the Data Buddies program to UC Irvine, meaning that we pull our students once a year, and then we receive reports about the students' sense of belonging and resilience and support, and desire to continue in the major. We also, oh, and I wanted to point out, we also have this new section of the report that disambiguates data by disability status. So we can look to see if students with disabilities are being disproportionately not supported. We also host an annual event thanks to Access Computing's mini grants program that brings together blind and low vision high schoolers, teachers of the visually impaired, and folks, my colleagues here at the university, to talk about how to support those students to get into college STEM majors. One student who attended last year said, I honestly got a little bit emotional. I thought, I'm not alone in this. All right. So we're kind of building community and trying to get folks to realize how we can do better. And then a fourth example is that going back to task forces, I had the opportunity to chair a disability cultural center task force on campus that drew up specifications for something equivalent to, say, a women's center for success or an LGBTQ plus center, but for students with disabilities on campus. And then later I had the opportunity to advocate for and secure about $500,000 to try to found the Disability Cultural Center for the first couple of years. And the last example I'll give you is that recently I founded a new faculty and staff group of people with disabilities and their allies. So the Association for Disabled Faculty and Staff is now here, and we have 60 members. Okay, I have one more question for you. I'd love to see more engagement. Can you share some strategies that you use to make changes like these? And notice some of those changes are pretty small. You know, it doesn't take all that much effort to have a little club that meets once a quarter. And it's some of these are bigger, like that change we made with the Data Buddies survey. Now those results get sent to all of the Data Buddies participating across the country. So anyway, what are your strategies? Go ahead and share. What are some of your strategies for making institutional change? Connection, coalition building, excellent. You need to find others who share your values and vision and share the work. Build cross-campus networks. Excellent. You need to have people with perspective and skills and resources from across your institution so that you can tackle these bigger problems together. You need allies. You need strength in numbers. You need to break down those campus silos, right? There may only be a few other people on campus who have those interests. For example, right now we're putting together a list of disability studies oriented courses across campus so that we can cobble together a disability studies minor with the dream that someday we'd have a major or a department. But you got to work across campus for that. Find almost allies and recruit them. Oh, you're excellent. Yes. Let other people know your passion, especially with disability. Usually, folks who care about DEI in general don't know that you can put an A on the end of that and talk about accessibility. So bring them in. Start small, brilliant, collect data. Excellent. Provide evidence to get buy-in. You have no idea how much I follow this. I actually invite myself to my colleagues' meetings across campus and just share some of the data with them, and then they get excited about joining our cause. You all are pros at this. My quick tips are share your goals. Just a quick example of this. When I first got to UC Irvine, my department chair took me out to coffee and said, "So what are your goals?" And I said, "I know it's strange for a junior faculty member, but the reason I sought a tenure track position is because I want to make this institution feel more at home for someone like me, a woman with a disability, etc." And he nominated me for the Provost Leadership Academy. And when I went there, I worked really hard, and someone noticed me. One of the senior administrators noticed me, and she said, "I saw the good work you did, and I want to mentor you." And then guess what she did? She put me on the strategic planning committee. And that's how we have a strategic plan that mentions disability and accessibility. Um, anyway, so you need to also find each other. So I think that that's partly about like being at that campus level, meeting people across campus who see you and want to support your vision, and then, you know, some sponsors who pull you up. But it's also about finding peers. So the ADFS, that club, I just happened to meet a couple other allies and disabled folks on campus, and I, you know, actually asked after the Disability Cultural Center Task Force, I ended up saying, "Hey, we should have a club." And they were like, "Yeah." And we're like, "Let's do it together." So we split the work across the three of us, and we did a very minimal thing and said, "Let's meet once a year." And then the other thing is take it one step at a time. Again, we started the club with just that one quarterly meeting a year. And then after a few meetings, we said, "Hey, is there anything we want to do together?" And we kind of took a poll and we decided we wanted, going back to the good advice, we want to collect some data about the disability experience on campus. And so we put together a little work group of people energized to do that. And now we have a survey we're about to launch to start to get some of those data. And I will say it's a tough time right now. I just learned that that money we secured for the Disability Cultural Center, that it may not actually be put to that use because of the financial concerns at this time. And so, I know that sometimes we take steps forward and then there are steps back, but I'm a true believer that when you have a community of people who share your goals and dreams, that you will continue to make the progress where you can and where it makes sense. So my last pitch to you before I hand it off is I want to encourage you to join Access Computing's Community of Practice, where Brianna, Elaine, Raja, and I hang out with many of our partners across the country, and we create that community for each other and empower each other to make institutional change. All right, I hope we have time for Q&A at the end, and look forward to talking with you all.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Elaine, and I'm gonna talk about conference accessibility once Stacy's iPhone is updated. Uh, I care a lot about conference accessibility because I care a lot about getting students all the way through the academic pipeline and into faculty positions. One of the best ways that we can make institutional long-term change that doesn't depend on any one person is to get more people. And I also care a lot about assistive technology. And I think that the best assistive technology is not co-designed in the sense of a technologist, a non-disabled technologist comes in and works with a community, but the best assistive technology is designed by disabled people themselves. So why is conference accessibility so important, right? So in most of computer science, the conferences is where we publish, it's where we make connections to our community, and being able to attend and present your work at conferences is a really important venue to success, right? A way to become successful. And something that I've learned in talking to people is that we sort of, in the same way that you might think, oh, well, the accessibility office could take care of accommodations and then accessibility in the classroom is solved. People have the same kind of idea when it comes to accessibility in conferences, that you can either just assume the conference will be accessible. Surely the venue knows how to do accessibility. Um, or you maybe assign a student to be an accessibility chair and figure they can, check on some things, arrange for captioners, and then again, accessibility is sort of taken care of. But the reality is, as my slide says here, accessibility and the need for access needs exist in every single part of your conference organizing, and in fact, touch parts of conference organizing that, let's say, require pretty significant political capital to make changes. So all the way from the very first organizational moments of the conference, all the way through the evening events. And so I want to run through some examples to give you a sense of what kind of accessibility needs you might run into while organizing a conference, not just, say, an ACM kind of specific topic-oriented conference, but also your diversity and inclusion conferences, because as Brianna mentioned, disability cuts across every other identity. And so if you are organizing a conference that is for humans, you will have some kind of disability represented. So we could go a little further in my animation. So when in the very earliest stages of preparing for a conference, when you think about things like how you are organizing your organizational team, you have to think about accessibility. So if you have a participant who an organizer who is deaf, who's disabled, who has travel limitations, then you need to think about what kind of video conferencing software are you using to do your organization in the first place? Are you having in-person meetings? Are those in-person meetings going to be accessible? The other place that you have to start thinking about accessibility really early is in budgeting. Accessibility does cost money, and I think that's really where the rubber hits the road on accessibility in most cases. People generally agree that we would like for things to be accessible to as many people as possible, but as soon as they realize that it costs more money, or it costs money to fix decisions that you maybe made earlier that were not accessible, suddenly the importance of inclusion takes a back seat to the importance of not spending that money. So making sure that you're budgeting for accessibility, that you consider accessibility to be an important budget item. The way I put it is, my goal is that people would consider accessibility as essential to conferences as coffee. So if you think about it, right, people they're like, oh, you can't cut the coffee. That's like, that's the last thing that we'll cut. And yet you would keep that instead of having people be able to even be at the conference in the first place is just, mind blowing to me. And that for a lot of conferences, the scale of the cost of coffee is actually very similar to the scale of the cost of accessibility measures. So it's both a like prioritization thing, but also a way to give you a thought to think about kind of the amount of money that you're budgeting that does scale with the number of people. So moving to the next steps, in the submission registration page, submission needs to be accessible. Your reviewing site needs to be accessible, right? You may have reviewers who have disabilities. All of these web things associated with a conference need to be accessible. And making sure that people can make good decisions about their choices to submit or not to submit is really important. So having an accessibility FAQ or at least some information about the venue, especially if there's something is not going to be accessible. So for example, if the venue won't let you bring in outside food, or if the venue has stairs, then people need to know that well in advance so that they know like this conference is not for me. As you think about the venue, I think this is the thing that most people find more obvious. And Stacy, you can flip it forward one for this. These are the things that I think most people think about. Is the venue accessible? Does the venue say they're accessible? But don't forget about getting to the venue. So for example, in New York City, a lot of the public transit is not super accessible if you're a wheelchair user. In Boston, a lot of the public transit is not super accessible if you're a wheelchair user. Bathrooms, places will say it will be accessible, but not have accessible bathrooms. And I don't know about your conferences. The conferences I go to last all day. So a lack of accessible bathrooms is a pretty big problem. And also hotels. Are there accessible hotels? Are they close to the venue? And can you get from the accessible hotel to the venue? It's very funny when there's one hotel that has accessible rooms, which is not accessible, like has no accessible route to the accessible venue. It's like, well, okay, what was the point of that? I still can't go. Accessibility also shows up in presenting and sessions. So accessibility is not the work of only one person or an accessibility chair, but actually has to do with the entire community. So training student volunteers, having your ASL interpreters, having your captioners, making sure your stage is accessible. The number of venue organizers' days I've ruined by showing up in my wheelchair and looking at the stage and asking how am I going to get on the stage is, let's say, non-trivial. Make sure that there are microphones and that people are using them. And I think really kind of having an ethos of inclusion. So if the captioning stops working, the presenter stops talking. If the microphone isn't working, you get people a different microphone. So really, again, making this a priority. And last, I want to talk about something that I think people think about perhaps less, which is the food and socializing. So certain kinds of dietary restrictions, especially severe allergies, things like celiac disease, can be disabling. Not everyone who has these conditions considers it a disability, but I think we think of food as optional in a way that is very strange, considering like humans need food to exist. And even venues that do a good job on thinking about things like wheelchair accessibility will have non-accessible food or not have food options. There's also things like thinking about what the seating is going to look like at the venue. So if I show up in my wheelchair and you only have high top tables, I will be sitting at the table like this, peeking over it. That's fine, but it's not very inclusive. Also things like quiet areas. So having a place for people to decompress, which ends up being very good for your neurodiverse population, but also really for anybody, right? A lot of these things are good for a wide range of people. Going to the next slide. I want to talk just a tiny bit about going beyond conferences, right? I said I want students to be able to make it all the way to being faculty. And the reality is the learning that we do and that students do is not just in the classroom. And even the learning outside of the classroom is not just at conferences and events. So it's things like internships. Stacey, if you want to advance, clubs and organizations, and labs and maker spaces. And if you kind of think about the whole set of all of this, which is my last animation, there we go. We sometimes talk about this as co-curricular learning. You can sometimes, you also hear this referred to as extracurricular activities, but I think referring to it that way makes it sound really optional in a way that it's not, or it's not if it's still important, right? It complements the learning that happens in the classroom and actually helps students make connections and learn things that they can't learn in the classroom or that are hard to learn in the classroom. So finally, to wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit more about accessibility specifically in maker spaces. So this is actually from a paper from one of my students, where we talked to a bunch of disabled makers and makerspace operators about the kinds of barriers that you see in maker spaces. And I think a lot of this is also true in the wider range of co-curricular activities. And these barriers go all the way from how people are recruited into these spaces to the physical access and access to information, the sort of feeling of inclusivity and belonging, and also the financial accessibility of the space. So we sometimes think about financial accessibility when we think about other accessibility, but I think it is something that's important to think about in co-curricular spaces, especially, if it costs $100 to be in the makerspace, or you can take those $100 and use it to get access to, say, food that's safe for you if you're a student with a severe allergy. I think the priorities are pretty clear, though. And I just want to point out that it's, again, there's nothing about us without us. So this is a quote from a disabled maker who loves makerspaces, loves makerspace culture, but points out that although you can use that mentality to bridge accessibility gaps, you have to get inside first. And I think that is, when I think about conferences, when I think about co-curricular spaces, it's really about getting people into the space and then giving them the tools that they need to be able to change that space. And that's all I have to tell you about today, so I'll hand it off to Raja.
Hi, everyone. This is Raja Kushalnagar, speaking through a sign language interpreter. I am deaf, and I don't hear my own voice when I talk, and I'm just joking. I actually don't know how to pronounce my name, so hopefully that interpreter did a good job, but I wouldn't know. All I know is how to fingerspell my name. My first written language, though, is English, and then I learned sign language later. So this presentation is about how to think about accessibility, preferences, and language access, and different views on that. For students with disabilities, there's a wide range of capabilities and preferences of learning and experience, which is very important. So, with that said, now I'd like to emphasize, what does mentorship and advising, what do these two terms mean? Mentorship is broader than advising, I would say. Both are equally important. We need both to travel through the academic world and the future, and to set someone up for success in their future. Very often people think K-12, that's where we learn how to succeed, and then they transition from K-12 to the college and university setting to grad school. And then each transition, there just has some differences. And students with disabilities have learned how to both know what they don't know, learn how to ask for support, and gain allies for support. And this is where mentoring and advising can happen. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a moment to read and then I'll make some remarks on this. So often in different areas, first there's the specific environment, say in
Housing.
in-house course registration. They have their academic experience. And then there are other specifications with the environment where we need both types of support. Often, on the coursework journey, we have to ask, is this classroom accessible? Is the schedule accessible? Is this student someone who will need to be accompanied by an interpreter? Where do they get tutoring services? What about if they have a learning disability? How do we address these issues? And so that ties together with courses and the academic experience. So that said, all that together, it's very helpful for the university to have a support system. And a lot of students with disabilities, if they're aware, we can ask them which universities and colleges have the great support systems that we'd like to see and which don't. So we asked 5,000 students in higher education. And in theory, all are receiving support as students with disabilities. No. Okay, so in practice, really only half are getting these things. So staff, faculty, and students are supporting the
Holistic.
they're providing holistic support. Next slide, please. So both dealing with accessibility and success. It's not enough to provide access to resources. For example, a deaf student, you give them an interpreter and that's all they'll need? That's all the access they need? No, you also need awareness about how success happens in the college environment and transition to advocacy. How to take ownership of their own journey in the learning process. All of these factors. And that's where mentorship can be very important. And it also overlaps with advising. Also, over time, the student can grow and thrive. And part of that can be pairing them with mentors and advising at different levels. There's peer mentors who are on their same level, and then there are staff and faculty members who serve different roles. And peer mentoring. So next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one. That's right, here we are. That's what I was talking about, the peer mentoring versus tiered mentoring. So the first one, it's important as students go through their journey, they apply it to their everyday experience, and it's also important on the systemic level. For example, when I went to university, I was the only deaf person who was there on campus for a long time. And I thought I needed, or they thought I needed, that I was hard of hearing. And so they were offering to provide different types of support than what I actually needed. So they didn't know they couldn't provide the appropriate support, which is what I actually needed. So that's a systemic level issue. And there are resources that need to be utilized at that level. Next slide, please. So overall, mentoring needs to consist of a range of support. It consists of someone who has shared and relatable experiences so that they can connect with a student, and also a sense of comfort. Well, I was just going to kind of read through what these different layers are. Next slide. Well, I do have a little time. We have 10 more minutes for questions and answers for any of our presentations, if you'd like to engage.
Alrighty, thank you all so much for that presentation. I know I would love to kick us off while folks are adding their questions in the chat. And kind of chronologically going through the presentation, Brianna, you laid out these objectives for access computing, and in particular, you talked about individual engagement as sort of like the #1 objective, or it was at least the first on the list, which I feel like is sort of a really important place to start. And the slide mentioned critical junctures, right, to really ensure success. And I think that those of us in higher ed can imagine what some of those critical junctures might be. And certainly we know that what helps some students tends to help all students. But I'm curious if you might have some insight into what those critical junctures might be when we're specifically thinking about students with disabilities.
You know, I don't think we think about it any differently. And I smiled when you said individuals, because we've had to reframe that a bit in the past few months in terms of thinking about it. It's not necessarily just students with disabilities, but also those who want to make a difference with regards to accessibility. I don't think a lot of that is necessarily unique to disability, right? We're looking at the same things of, are they getting internships? Are they graduating? You know, are they getting a job when they've graduated? And you know, those sorts of milestones, and whether they are making it through those or not.
Okay, that sounds good. And I think that that is a perfect segue into thinking about what Stacy was talking about. Stacy, I feel like your session, or like the section of your presentation, talked a lot about basically things that rely on institutional commitment. So things like the Disability Cultural Center, and kind of alluding to what Brianna just said, like we're in a very different time now, and the landscape is shifting around us. So given that institutional commitment might not be baked into this work in the same way that it would have been in a prior era, what advice do you have to take a more grassroots approach to this work?
It's a good question. I think we're all trying to figure it out, and I would love to hear what others are doing because I know all of us are probably scrambling. But I think the thing that keeps me going is I know that many, many, many of our neighbors in our institutions and outside of them believe that everyone ought to have access. And I think that's because we have disabilities, our children, our parents, our neighbors have disabilities. It's something like 27% of the US population has some form of disability. And so we understand that it's important to bring all of us along. And so I just start from that from that point in conversations. And I'm trying to build networks with people, especially in the community around UC Irvine right now, to kind of, align our resources and energies around our shared values. So I'm like working with nonprofits, and we just got to keep on keeping on.
Absolutely, yeah. That I think the strategy about coalition building definitely spans a lot of different facets of this work. So that's a really important point. We've got some questions from the audience. So what are some upcoming opportunities to get engaged and to continue to expand our awareness and advocacy for accessibility and accessible spaces?
Well, I know we have some webinars that are coming up, and my colleague Eric might have those links handy to drop them in the chat. One is from our colleague Amy Coe, who's in the Information School here at University of Washington, is going to be talking about social justice and education. And another one is from some disabled grad students talking about their use of Gen AI for accessibility. And so we often do webinars like this and share those on our mailing list as well. So again, if you're interested in learning more about these topics on a regular basis, you can shoot us an email at accesscomp@uw.edu, or you can email me individually at blazer@uw.edu, and we will get you added to our mailing list at least once a week. We're sharing resources on there. And I just shared something today, and it had some things very much about education and science, but I also saw an article this week about a blind skateboarder who designed a skate park. And I was like, well, that I want to read about and understand, and how does that work, right? So some fun stuff mixed in there. Thanks, Elaine, for dropping that in the chat. We also from time to time do book clubs, reading books either about disability inclusion, about technology, or the experiences of people with disabilities. So we have one coming up where we'll be reading a graphic novel called El Defo, about a deaf bunny rabbit and her experiences in grade school. And so thinking about, students in K-12 education and what their experiences might look like. So I'm excited about that.
And then yes, Eric, thank you for adding all of these great events. So I hope folks are clicking on those links and getting registered for them. One more question. So Elaine, I know that your section of the presentation talked about sort of what feels to me like the bare minimum of what we should be doing in terms of accessibility, things like having bathrooms available for everyone. So I'm curious to sort of take like the opposite view and think about this like pie in the sky. What in your experience has been some of the most ideal conference experiences you've seen where it really feels like the conference organizers have not just sort of checked the box on accessibility, but really applied sort of an intentionality and care to that aspect of planning where you really felt well cared for?
I think we, often look to assets for leadership in this space. And it's funny to think about the like pie in the sky ideal, because I would say I don't think I've ever been to a conference that didn't have some accessibility barriers. To me, it's really about having a community, and I don't remember who is the first person to kind of advance this idea. There's an idea that accessibility isn't like a destination, right? There's not a pie in the sky, perfect accessible conference, but that it's actually about a process and an ethos of inclusion. And so you can really build that in any community. So I know, for myself, when I think about accessibility, communities that have a lot of disabled people in them tend to have that ethos of inclusion and that sense that if someone's being left out, we're going to pause, we're going to wait, we're going to figure out, we're going to do what we need to do. We're going to meet outside if we have to because there are steps up to the front steps. We will negotiate our, sometimes conflicting access needs, right? Two disabled people might have needs that you just are mutually exclusive. It does happen sometimes, but you negotiate it and you find ways to include people. So, I guess it's a little bit cynical in some ways that like I don't think we can right now have the, oh, accessibility is taken care of and we can just stop thinking about it conference, but that it's really, we can build communities that care about accessibility and care about including people. And so, like I said, I feel like assets is one of those, but when we have meetings at Access Computing, right, those meetings are set up to be accessible and to make sure everybody's included. I think often you see much better accessibility also in smaller events because it's much more noticeable when you exclude one person. So if you think about the kind of care that you would bring to an event that is a group of 4 or 5 people and you really want to include everyone, that to me is the level of care that we need to bring to our larger events too. I really like, Brianna had it, I think in her slides, one of our little stickers that says accessibility is love. And so I think of it as a way of caring for each other.
I love that. Accessibility is love. Yes, we definitely love those. And Laura, I see your question in the chat about saving it. It may be that the save chat feature is disabled for attendees, but I will definitely save the chat now. And so when you get your post-attendance email from me thanking y'all for coming, I'll make sure to include all of the links that are here so we aren't losing all the good information that's being shared here. It looks like we have time for one more question. So for students, supporting students with disabilities in a 60% academic advisor role, how are organizations like NACADA partnering with organizations like Access Computing to advocate?
So I will admit, I don't know NACADA, but I would love to know who they are and how we can work with them. We partner with a lot of organizations and our model is very nimble because I find that when we work with different organizations, the ways that might be most beneficial for the other organization or for us may be different. So for example, NCWIT, we can do things like this where we're helping each other reach each other's organizations. We share NCWIT resources all the time. We are happy to provide feedback on accessibility for NCWIT. That's something that works well with us. One of the things we often do with academic institutions is talk to them about, hey, how are you thinking about this in your department? Thinking about some of the sorts of things that Stacy talked about. How can we think about strategic change within your department? We have a lot of employers that reach out to us and they're interested in connecting with students with disabilities, right? And so we talk about that. And they also help us prepare the students we're working with for the job market. So we do a lot of negotiating and finding ways that we can have mutually beneficial relationships. But yeah, if there's somebody we should be connected with, let us know. And now I'm going to go look up NACADA.
Yes, it's a fantastic organization. I think someone added more, Stacy added some more information about them, but it's just the academic advising sort of national conference. And there's also statewide chapters that sort of roll up to the national. So just a really good place to be on the front lines of that student institution interaction. But I think we're out of time now, but thank you all so much for joining us today. I dropped a link in the chat for you to share some feedback on this session. The Meeting of the Minds webinar series is one that we do on an ongoing basis. So we're open to feedback and to really tailor this session to meet your BPC needs. But thank you all so much for coming. And Raja, I know I didn't get a chance to ask you a question, but I'll go ahead and just throw in a personal comment. I love your U of H shirt. So go Cougs and Cougar Red Friday. So just really loving that Cougar pride. Even though we're here with CU Boulder, of course. But thank you all so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you at our next Meeting of the Minds.